So good afternoon. I am Anto Gudiarjo. Welcome to Monday Live. This is something that we do every Monday at 3 p.m. Eastern. We're here to discuss advances in smart buildings. Panelists are listed on mondaylive.org if you want to know who we are. A reminder that views expressed here on the show is personal, not of any company or organization, and please do use the Zoom chat and Q&A. We really would very much like this, especially this month and this week, to be a very interactive conversation as we did last week. It was really great. So, and also this deck is on mondaylive.org if you want to see any of the links or any of the information conveyed on it. Reminder, our focus of this month is the Division 2525 specification that we are working on. Our agenda is we'll have our normal chit chat, what's going on in the world, and then we'll talk about Division 2525. Specifically, our focus this week is going to be on this sort of analytics related stuff that quite a lot has actually been done on the spec. So looking forward to that. But before we jump into that, let's jump into Mr. Ken Sinclair. What's going on in your world, Ken?
Thank you very much, Anto. Of course, the strong message is Vegas is on, and we had that confirmed as in the early discussion there that majority of the folks on the screen here are appearing in Vegas. Unfortunately, I will not be able to attend, but I will be there virtually. So that's we've got our January issue online called Defining You in 2022. And Vetting Vegas it's no matter what's going to happen, it's going to be an evolutionary event, and it's poised to change the industry. I think it's got us all thinking about how these venues and how these events are going to play out in the future. Also, I've just sent off my next chapter, which is a bit of an adaptation of the January issue, but it's your adaptation to 222. And I'm kind of trying to spin the concept that you're growing legs, you need to walk out of the water or become a fish out of water, or you got to dive back into the ocean of obscurity. Understanding how you change and how you need to change is cardinal in your survival. Out of these confused seas of the past few years will come rapid evolution in a new world. Hurry up and evolve. That's kind of my message, to try and get people to just embrace the changes that are upon them. The next discussion is an interesting one as well, because it's talking a bit about the movement to cloud-based, and there's certainly some opinions there for sure. This LinkedIn post, we basically had over 3,000 views, and I pointed out it's a great part of the discussion for sure, is how much is going to be cloud-based and how much is not. What's happening is what part of this needs to be in the brick and mortar spec, and what part of this do we see has separated and migrated to off-prem into distributed intelligence. And if large buildings are to survive, they must allow a fabric of control-driven innovation with people as the first mindset. Some interesting concepts there that I think we need to deal with, either agreeing or disagreeing. Our contributing editor, Nicholas, has been doing some stuff in that area as well. There's a few other concepts that I put in that post. Is I kind of see that the heavy metal in our industry, in our buildings, the chillers, boilers, pumps, will come with their own controls and connections and interoperative standards to achieve distributed intelligence and interaction and necessary controls. And anyway, the lighter metal, which the terminal devices, heat pumps, lighting, etc., will come with either on-prem or off-prem control. There will always be fail-safe backup and connection, but there's a big desire to make a lot of that community-driven So interesting concepts there, I believe. I think that's enough trouble for now, and I'll give it back to you, Anto.
Enough trouble from Ken. Thank you, Ken. So moving on, John.
Yeah, sorry I couldn't join you last week. I was living in the pre-industrial age with no electricity for 5 days. I've added a little bit to this, but I think what I've been watching is, in a sense, a trend is how major organizations are focusing or making statements or commitments on, carbon neutrality, reducing their carbon footprint, greenhouse gas reduction, et cetera. So, Goldman Sachs set targets for 2030. Green building tax breaks supposedly are getting a boost from Uncle Sam to help fund this. And an interesting article from Fast Company, again, which, the magazine really doesn't have to do with our world of physical infrastructure, but high tech, and that side that, you track productivity. Now you need to track your sustainability, right? And you need to report on that. And I think that's the key trend I see with all of this is there's increasing need that you have to calculate, track, and report your carbon impact, greenhouse gas impact, et cetera. So continuing trend there. The question is, how does that filter through to the real world systems that we're typically involved in to achieve those goals, right? It's great if you have the data. How'd you get the data? It's great if you can affect some change. How are you going to communicate to the building systems to affect the change, right? So this is this place we've talked about where the physical and the virtual need to come together to get the end results.
Okay, great, thank you. Roger.
Yeah, I guess it's something we've talked about before, which is, when the big companies get involved, it helps put some weight behind some of our causes. And I noticed Microsoft has sponsored a report from the institute there, Institute about IoT and OT and the whole thing that's going on there. And it's quite an interesting report. Obviously, Microsoft are trying to push their Defender, but principally, they interviewed about 600 companies, and as you can see there, one of the questions: did the organization experience a cyber incident over the past 2 years? And 44% people said yes, which is quite interesting. But about I think it's more than 50% of the people said that their IT and OT networks are connected, and obviously it's becoming more of an issue as people are remotely connecting as well now. And so I think the whole thing is becoming, much more visible. And as we've always said, that when the bigger companies get behind some of these things, it helps our cause. And on the right-hand side, I don't know whether you saw this previously, but it's a German building where it got hacked, and they actually deconfigured the controllers. So there was the completely wiped out the controllers, so nothing actually was on. The only way they could get it back on was literally go back on site manually, turn everything back on with no controls. And literally there was nothing, and it took them a few days to actually get all the controllers loaded up again to actually get the building back. So it's becoming a little bit more and more of an issue, and that I think it's these sort of things that I'm thinking this year that maybe we'll get the profile it probably deserves.
Great, thank you, Roger. Anno.
Yeah, just an interesting report from Memori. Got it on my analysis from last year too. It was over $13 billion invested in smart building technology last year, just 2021. You can see some of the metrics there, right? That's a 55% increase from the previous annual record set back in 2018. And again, the second half of the year gained a momentum of over 60% in the smart building. My uptake, my take on this, of course, is that's a lot of money to be spending in smarter building technology. Which means, you know, some of this stuff we won't see for a year or two. Some of the stuff we'll see immediately. It you know, generates, there's going to be a lot of new technologies, new solutions, new people, new companies, new approaches, you know, going to come into the marketplace. Some of it's going to end up confusing users and end users, which again, I think our initiative on the smarter stack is in the right direction to help people, you know, wade through a lot of this stuff. But this also is on the back of that Steve Fay dropped a link earlier in the chat to a emerging technology outlook link, which talked about just general investment in startups and technologies. You know, for 2021 was also a significant year. So I think something to keep an eye on, and with that, of course, continuing M&A activities. See CBRE just, I think CBRE acquired Building I just recently. JLL just acquired Hank Technologies. So still a lot of movement going on, a lot of new money coming into the marketplace.
So Anna, Mark, so I question on this figure or this piece that you've got up here, 13 billion invested in smart building technology last year. So do we think, is this true hardcore building technology, or is this taking into account prop tech stuff, CRE tech stuff, whatever?
Yeah.
Do we know? What's your thoughts on that?
It's a whole spectrum of that, Mark. To be honest, there's a lot of it is IoT. You know, there's a lot of money being plowed into IoT, which again means you can't ignore it. You know, if investors are investing in it, they see market and opportunity and so forth. A lot of it is in CRE or occupancy management, which is another high interest area, just managing occupants and occupant flow and that sort of stuff. So wide spectrum of stuff.
Yeah, I was talking, last thing on this, I was talking to some analysts last week, and you know, about the influx of all the capital that's being invested into the wider market or the market itself. So I asked a specific question. I talked to 3 individual analyst firms and asked, do you foresee a brick wall or an implosion happening soon, anytime soon? Yes or no, whatever. And just generally, they think that the window is getting much shorter for the company or the technology to prove itself and to really see if it is a market for that technology. And they're on average, the sum of it is that all 3 of them said that they are expecting an implosion sometime in 2023.
2023, you said?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Great. Thank you, Anno. So I've been sort of monitoring this sort of automation and jobs moving over potentially to be replaced by automation. I mean, I just find this subject intriguing. So there's a couple of articles here, both on VentureBeat. One is talking specifically about bots, and the other one talking about jobs in the what they're calling the new normal. My main thing, I think I mentioned this a few weeks back, is that I always wondered how automation was going to replace jobs, and I think we're sort of seeing it play out here, and I just find it quite interesting that it's actually people not wanting to do certain jobs that then becomes automated, rather than automation coming along and then kicking out jobs, as it were. Maybe a bit of both, but I just find this interesting. So before we move on, any other thoughts that we didn't capture?
Yeah, I posted a link to a a PitchBook site where you can download their report about what they believe is going to happen in this year, 2022, top 11 areas in technology. And why I did this is a couple of the areas were specific to our world. So one was on carbon and the green, green movement that John was referring to earlier. So you'll see some references to carbon capture as a big initiative there. But then on the side of cybersecurity, what Roger was picking up on, there's a big section there that said IoT, OT, cybersecurity is going to be this year. They're predicting $1 billion transaction in our space for a company going public for a valuation of about $1 billion for the first time. So I thought that was very interesting, to say the least. And then lastly, there's I thought very interesting from a cyber perspective, passwords are going away. Increasingly, the use of passwords as a method for authentication is being replaced by biometrics and other things, so that you don't have to input a password, remember a password. So you'll see a reference to that. But I think what's really, because we've talked a lot about venture things here, the pitch book actually lists a lot of these companies that are coming up that are developing these different technologies. So you get a sense of who they are and what they do if you want to follow up from the download. But the download doesn't cost anything, so feel free to take advantage of the link.
Great, thank you, Steve.
Yep.
Thanks. All right, so moving on to specifications. Just as a reminder, this is kind of the framework of the how we're approaching this challenge, this project, based on the smarter stack. And the idea is we're creating this thing that we're calling Division 2525, with an overall 25-25-0-0 as the master system interoperability, which is what we called it, and then a section 10, 20, etc. For each of the different layers, and a section on 90. Right, just to remind us of that. But our conversation this week is really mostly on analytics, and I would say that's probably mostly around 25-25-40 in that yellow apps layer. But since we have a couple of really great experts on analytics on our panel here, John and Jim, I'm going to hand over most of the discussion over to them to lead. I don't know who wants to lead first.
I'll throw out a few comments about why we got started with this. I think one of the concerns this group has is, we want owners and operators to be able to understand the different options available to them and be able to assess them. And there's a lot of confusion in the market. A lot of those, a lot of the companies coming out. And this is in general, it's a new field, even though Jim's been in it a long, long time. But let's call it an emerging market for the people buying the stuff, okay? Not the people who've been working this for 10 and even 20 years. And there's a lot of noise out there, and there wasn't really a way that we could see that how would an owner assess without going through a tremendous amount of work on their own. And so, we thought that we could help that first through the smarter stack, right? I mean, that's where this originated. And I know you talked about that last week, but I wasn't here. And then breaking it down to one of the key areas of interest, which is applying analytics to building systems, energy data, et cetera. And so we agreed that this could be something we could help with. And I think one of the key things that I think one of the most important things we are doing about this is the fact that competitors in the market are working together to try to provide specification language to help all, to raise all, raise the tide, to raise all the boats, to make a bigger market for everyone, and to help owners properly understand and assess so that they can make smart purchasing decisions. And I think that's really cool. that we're doing that. And, it speaks to two things. One, kind of the ethos of a lot of the people involved in the Monday Live group. And it also speaks to the reality of the fact that this is still an emerging market. As I've joked in the past, the day Jim and I are mud wrestling over customers on the side of the road will be the day the market has made it.
Right.
We're not there by any stretch of the imagination, and we can see why. It's hard for people to assess these things. So that's kind of a couple of initial thoughts to start the discussion.
Sounds great. So, so John mentioned this process we went through to try to build a least common denominator specification so that we can set a baseline for what analytics is. And independent individual manufacturers after that will, of course, add their own value added and go in their different directions for different markets, different market segments for different customers. And that's a wonderful thing. But at least if we establish a floor of what the basic functionality of what the words, what the vocabulary means in this area, it gives us all a running start to separate the wheat from the chaff. And, if other people want to be in other businesses that don't meet the definition, that's fine too. But as a group, we're trying to establish those definitions. So that's where we are now. And we've got a spec, we've got it up, and we're working on other specs in the 2540 application layer, including an energy information spec and a measurement and verification spec. So the question is, how do we get some change to happen out in the world from that work, right? It's great so that these things are out there so that people can work on their product differentiation and understand what they're doing, but how do we actually grow the market? And what we have is a series of tactical and strategic ideas to partner with and take these specs to other groups. So John was contacted last week by some guys that are working on ASHRAE 90.1. And apparently there's already spec language requiring analytics in large buildings in 90, or suggesting that it's a good idea to have analytics in buildings in 90.1. And they're trying to lower the size of the building to get more of it out there. So there's direct outreach for somebody that came to us, and we're using the Smarter Stack as a guideline to advance that. Now, some of the other topics we're looking at working on are potentially taking these concepts and growing to groups like NIASCO, working with the C4SB group to reach out nationally to the Department of Energy, to the White House, to other people, to fundamentally say, hey, look, energy services for many years have been a business predicated on energy only. And the biggest component of performance contracting in those energy services companies is risk. And we can say, instead of looking at risk financially the way we always have, what we should be doing is using analytics as a methodology of transparency to have a new way of going to market, so that we don't have to have all energy services paid for by performance contracts. And there's a lot of interest and uptake around that, primarily because the energy services business is out of gas. They've predicated the last 30 years of their work on changing light bulbs, and they've done a great job of it. Unfortunately, they changed the last one. And when you don't have when you don't have a huge number of a huge amount of payback to spread around from lighting, you've got to find some way to grow the business. So there's a perfect example of a way we can take the 2525 series of specifications and use them as a wedge to change how the world runs. I'll leave it at that for a second. I've got more to come later.
Anto, you are on mute.
Mute.
There you go. Sorry.
There we go.
I have the draft analytics specs. Would it be useful to bring that up right now?
Sure.
Yeah, to show them that we actually have created something.
We actually have some.
Right.
There you go. This is a version that is a few weeks old, but it's gone through. Who started this? The two of you basically been working on this.
Yeah.
Sure. John started it, and we finished it. And then John commented on it. So John, why don't you tell everyone what we started with?
So when we had this, one of the things I volunteered through my career in sales engineering and stuff, I ended up on the front line of visiting consultants, doing lunch and learns, helping them with guide specs over the past, from Andover controls to Teletrol to Tritium and stuff. So I get exposed to the whole spec thing. Not saying I'm an expert, but I got exposed to it all and was involved actually with a consultant who was working on a universal spec tool. So I had some affinity for it. And of course, in our selling efforts, we put together a guide spec that does include obviously differentiation that we'd love to have owners write into the spec that would give us a competitive advantage. But you know what? The majority of it was really written to help people break down what is analytics, what does it have to do, what are the components of it, et cetera. So I took a quick pass at sanitizing out as much commercialization as I could, and then handed it over to Jim and his team, who went further, added new content, further sanitized it with the goal of coming up with a I heard you mention it last week, and I'm searching for a better word. I don't like least common denominator, right? A baseline of required functionality. I think we need to review it that or refer to it that way, because that's the goal here. Is if you're talking about analytics, these are the fundamental elements of it. So anyways, it was consensus and review and an iterative process. Which is what we're going to do, what different people in the group are doing on the other components of the 25/25 stack of specs. And, that's how we got to this point. And I know, Anto, you've been working on a tool platform to put it in to make it easier for people to work with that, we'll hopefully be able to present to people as well. And as you said, one of our goals when we took this on in the late summer, early fall was, can we come out with a minimum viable product of 25/25 by the time we all hopefully get to AHR? And I think certain segments of it are definitely in that status right now, and be very useful for people. And I guess that's, I heard you guys talk when I listened to the recording about, how are we going to take this work product and help people use it, right? Which is, a key part of having an impact. And as I was listening to that, I said, well, those are all really valid questions, but the first thing is to have something that we can point to. And it was so interesting to be contacted by people at ASHRAE a week ago, 90.1 said, hey, we're trying to do this. And we could raise our hand and say, you know what, we've been working on it, and we have content that we can offer, right, from people who are intimately involved in analytics to try to help, to have it considered, possibly to get it, this work included. So I think just having it, there's a lot more interest out there. And the final thing I'll say is what we've seen with people responding to the smarter stack. It's, for the people who've seen it, the results have been, or the feedback has been overwhelmingly positive that this is a useful tool. And I think, to break down all of the things involved in an interoperable smarter building. I think there'll be a similar process here, and we can all get creative of how we get the word out, press releases, LinkedIn, whatever. But this is a body of work by people who are facing this every day, working with customers, and come together and said, let's put a baseline together that'll help educate the industry and the customers out there.
So a question from Arat, I hope I got that right. Is this shareable? Yes, it is. The whole objective of putting together this the specification is to put it into the public domain. Once we've got it to a certain level, we're nowhere near that yet. Our intent is to have a minimum viable product version of this, an MVP of this by AHR, which is 3 weeks from now. So that should happen. We have this material and some other material that we're going to be sharing in the next couple of weeks. But so you'll all see it there. It won't be finished. You'll have big caveats and notes about we needing input, but that's the whole purpose of having this MVP at the end of January to actually get feedback and to socialize it even further.
So I have a question for Jim and John, Mark. Well, again, the group, this is excellent and something we collectively, have been talking about for a while, and we're moving very rapidly to an endpoint, which is really good. I guess, as I see it, part of our challenge is to mention it, John, is the education behind this, letting people know and all that. But one of the things that I think we all have experienced in our industry here is the consulting community really knowledgeable yet about analytics within the building space and the particulars, the ins and outs of the building space analytics? That's question number one. And number two is with respect to is it the same folks who spec our controllers are going to spec the analytics side of this? Even though I think we all have said that we want, one major initiative has to be building owner facing for sure, no question about it. But how about any comments, thoughts about those kind of two observations here?
Let me start with a comment. We interact with a lot of different engineering firms, and I think that's a key thing you got to break down. There are consulting specifying engineering firms you go to for consulting and specifying, right? And then there are engineering firms you go to for energy analysis, energy ECM design, all of those types of things. And I would say on the latter group, there's an increasing awareness and adoption of analytics. I would say on the other group, the ones who are writing specs, I'm not seeing evidence that they have solid command of that and know how to specify, what they want and what their customers want, right? And I think that's one of the things when I get a spec sent to us for review, it's actually kind of deflating and demoralizing to see, well, this is a terrible spec. This isn't going to help the customer. This isn't going to guarantee them or even get them what I assume, and I'm pretty sure I know that's what the customers want, but the consultants don't, the specifying consultants, I haven't seen good results from yet. But that's very different from some of the engineering specialty firms who are really doing a great job with this type of stuff. So.
Yeah, I agree fully with John on that. And to Mark's point, our thesis has been that it is the large owners that are our customers that will take the specs to the consultants. So we've basically stopped spending a lot of time trying to chase those rank and file consulting engineers. And instead we're focusing on jamming it up the pipe the other way. And that has been the most effective thing over the last decade or so.
Mm-hmm. You do a lot of work in the government space as well. What do you think the attention or the acceptance of this sort of stuff in the government space would be?
I think it's been very strong. I think that we do work for the Health and Human Services Department, National Institute of Health, Food and Drug Administration labs, these kinds of things. And people are very attuned to the technology and using it. The fundamental barriers in the federal government is money. So in all of these departments, their energy efficiency budget is zero. Everything has to be funded through utility energy service contracts. And once again, I don't know why as a society, if we want energy efficiency, we can't pay for energy efficiency. And we have to go through some Rube Goldberg scam, which performance contracting is, instead of just paying for it. But when people have zero budgets, that's really the barrier rather than an understanding of the technology at this point.
But if there's this gap, I mean, what we've got here is a great description and guide of what AI should be. I guess the challenge will be for the consultants who perhaps this is new to is, what's the worked examples? I mean, in building automation, you've got optimal start, you've got load cycling, you could apply that to something, even chiller sequencing and stuff. So there were things that they could even cut and paste into, right? Which is what they used to do. But I guess they're looking now because they don't have that ability is, okay, so I've got this guide of what it is, but how do I apply it? Give me some worked examples here to put in the spec.
I think that's a really interesting case, Roger, because, basically, if you look over the spectrum of buildings and energy, typically people have focused on energy only because those are closed-ended value propositions they can sell. And it runs the range of everything from hours of operation to simultaneous heating and cooling, hunting loops. We could go on with specifics. John and I chose not to do that in the specs because different companies are going to want to differentiate themselves on the different analytics libraries they offer, et cetera. But this common theme of having models and rules-based analytics where we have standard data sets and cleansed data that is going through a series of algorithms, that's very different than putting a meter on a screen and calling that analytics. So big difference between data visualization and actually doing models-based and rules-based analytics. When we get down to the details, I would prefer not to standardize that level because I think that's where people need to differentiate.
Yeah. I
John?
think it goes to a question that David said, where David Katz posted a question, where does the new AI ML applications fit, right? Those are techniques to perform analytics, right? You might use machine learning to, identify or predict energy use, or you might use regression analysis. Good old regression analysis, been around forever, right? Okay, you can look at the difference you might achieve. I mean, AI and ML, those are math-based software techniques to work with data, right? There's lots and lots of them, right? And so they on their own aren't a panacea. They are one more algorithmic tool in the tool chest, right? To work with data. And different ones have value in different applications, right? And as Jim said, we didn't go to that. How are you going to calculate these things? That's open, but an analytics package should be able to do at least A through G, right, of the function set, right? And we'll compare how we do it and the accuracy of our results. That's separate, right?
Right, and then the key thing about the analytics package is it's got to be able to show its work, right? What is the math and the science that we arrived at that calculation with? Mm-hmm. And just to give an example, people toss around the words of AI and machine learning often, but it turns out that if you want to do root cause analysis of a physical system that you understand very well already, we've understood the physics of HVAC and the mechanical engineering of this field for 100 years. Do we want to use some vague statistical techniques that might arrive at something? Or do we want to use the knowledge we already have of how those systems work and build rules that actually give us root cause analysis? So with rules-based analysis, we can find out that the simultaneous heating and cooling occurred in the air handler because the chilled water valve is leaking. Rather than some statistical finger in the air saying, yeah, it looks like, the data didn't compare and, your air handler is not working right. Yeah. You need, as John said, you need to use the right tools for the job. And we need to get away from the hype of, screaming AI, which a lot of new entrants into the market do because they, haven't really spent a lot of time on understanding the physics of what we're trying to get done here.
I'd like to weigh in for a second. I don't know, Jim or John, one of you had done a smarter stack on analytics. I think you did earlier in the year.
Yeah,
both of us did.
Yeah. All right. So I don't recall specifically what you did in the top line and the purpose line as far as outcomes, but with regard to what Roger was saying, that would be, in my mind, the place to educate the consultants and the owners what they're going to get. What's the result of, as the example you just gave, Jim, of analyzing the performance of an HVAC system? Well, the outcome is you're going to find mechanical systems that are functioning improperly. So however you boil that into 1 or 2 or 3 words, and then maybe separately have a document that explains it in a little more detail. But basically, that's a valuable outcome that could be put in the top line of the smarter stack, and do 3 or 4 or 5 of those that are common outcomes that you believe all analytics systems should be able to create or generate. Now you've got a way for Roger and the rest of the marketplace to understand why they're doing analytics.
Absolutely. Well, let me answer that for a minute, Steve, by saying that, as at the lowest level, energy is something that people are always interested in, and energy savings and dollars arrive at that line. But for those of us that have been in the space for a long time, we have much greater aspirations than just energy value propositions. And I put these other buckets that go on the top line at things like what we call vendor management or enterprise management. So let me give you an example. Let's say that you're a large pharmaceutical company and you've outsourced all of your operations to one of the large facility management companies. All of your employees that now operated those buildings now work for that outsourced company. How do you have any idea as the manager at the pharma company that that company is doing a good job? And the answer is analytics, benchmarking things like time to repair, benchmarking energy savings, benchmarking mechanical equipment health. That is an enterprise value proposition, which is heretofore new to this kind of industry that's been worried about fixing leaky valves. That is actually all about contractual compliance of $100 million contracts. That's where this technology is going. And those are the kinds of things.
And Jim, I think that's great. And I would consolidate that down to benchmarking facility management performance. That's an outcome you would get from analytics.
Absolutely, Steve.
That's clearly very valuable. If I were, that farmer, I would want to show me how I do that, how your package accomplishes that. Man, that really helps.
So let me based on following up with that. So question I have is, or something that I see that I'm hoping I'm hoping the end results of these specs will help us in the industry is, I don't feel that the building owner operator truly can interpret the data from analytics. I think that is still a major, major challenge. And try as they might, but I just don't think, generally speaking, that they're there yet. Do we think that these specs, if people start looking at them and following them, do we think that will also help with that aspect of the analytics challenge?
I think so, Mark. And one of the things that we did, that John and I did in putting the spec together, and we've had this conversation out loud at conferences many times, let's talk about the fact that this is a services business. And what we're all about here is providing complete solutions. We have actually almost completely verified what you've said over the past 20 years. I would say we have about 5% of our customer base that's capable of running these tools and working on them on their own. But we realized that problem 20 years ago. And John's channel, Sky Foundry per se is a technology provider, but John's channel provides the same function that I do. And many other people that are in the analytics business basically present customers with complete solutions, with analytics, with workflow. And how far that's taken varies depending on the customer base, because I don't think it's one size fits all. But I think when we talk about analytic products or tools, I agree 100% with you. They're a non-starter in the market if they're not packaged with a delivery mechanism.
Yeah, and that's what. Yeah, I want to go back to Steve's comment because one of the through that discussion, Steve, one of the things I heard, because I hear it other times, is people conflate analytics and FDD. FDD is one thing you do with analytics, right? Tracking whether your vendor is, what's their time and are they meeting their contractual. That's not fault detection. That is analytics, right?
Mhm.
And similarly, other examples of just starting to benchmark a portfolio. How do you compare against your goals, where do your KPIs stand? That's not fault detection. That's using data analytics to get results. And I think I often bring this up because I think that people narrow the benefit of analytics by just saying fault detection, right?
Yeah,
That's
that's a good
one
point.
thing
Yep.
you do with analytics. And I would say we see many cases where that's far down the road for a customer. The first thing they need to do is even understand what their current performance is on their costs and energy consumption and potentially greenhouse gas. Faults come next, right? Well, okay, why are we in this situation, right? And that's part of this journey of using data, right?
Yep. No, that's great, John.
So I think, Jim, you had mentioned that one of the things you do with analytics is it creates transparency through verification. And that's obviously a big deal. But it also implies that you're making somebody transparent. You're gonna show that somebody's not doing their job.
I think that was, part of the first 20 years of learning in this business about go-to-market as to who would understand the value proposition and love it and who would fear it. And, a lot of people early on felt that this was Big Brother to persecute the janitor. And it takes almost a year at a customer site to show people that it's a continuous improvement process that helps them, that provides visibility into things they may have been trying to justify to management where no one was listening. So, we can be the champion. And in these big outsourced contractual compliance things, we often find that the vendor who's being scrutinized flocks to analytics after they understand it, because now they have real metrics that they can talk to customers about.
Mhm.
When we first instituted this kind of enterprise management, it was amazing to see what happened. We completely stimulated the antibody system of the large outsourced contractor, and they write 40-page white papers to try to run us out of the company we were working in. And by the time it was done, they were demanding that we were on every job. Why? Because the geniuses that put together this outsourcing also downsized the staff hugely, right? Oh, we don't need all those guys. Well, guess what? They did need all those guys. And now they had a fulcrum to go the other way, to go back to that pharma company and say, hey, look, we couldn't do with one controls engineer when we needed 3. So it cuts both ways, and it takes some time for this to propagate through. But this is the reality of being in the business. And, stimulating that, for certainly the first 10 or 15 years of the business, it was controls companies thinking that we were coming to steal their controls business, even though we're not in the controls business. And, these other effects, depending on, whose ox is apparently being gored, you have different things depending on where you are. But I think overall, what ends up happening is after people get to see what the analytics provide and that transparency, they find a new way to embrace it and move forward.
Which, just to circle back to the specs and the initiatives, right? I mean, that's one of the objectives too, is to educate, provide tools for people, the end users, consultants with what's the art of the possible, as opposed to individuals, trying to wage the battle that Jim's been waging for the last 20 years. And I think that's one of the objectives of what we're trying to do with the specifications, right, is to broaden that.
So people don't have to wait 15 years?
Well, 20 years, yeah.
I think a lot of what we're talking about here is still we're in the push mode, right? We're not getting any pull. And it's who's going to be the guys that ultimately pull it. And I think John touched on it in the fact that this is not just, the mechanical or the running of the building internally with the HVAC equipment, because after all, you would have thought the chiller guys were doing a lot of machine learning stuff to make make themselves more competitive. But is a lot of this the responsibility of the guys who are running the buildings, the facility management type people who should be embracing this more now as recipients of the data and the information and being able to give a better service, as John said, so that someone could benchmark how they're performing. And they need to be, I guess, judged about, if they're using this to actually provide a better service to their customers, the occupants, and perhaps the real estate guys.
I absolutely concur, Roger. The only question is do you want to have some independence so that you don't have the fox guarding the hen house? And I would argue that having an independent analytics consultant or company come in is the path forward, because then that transparency is guaranteed. Just as performance contractors today control the measurement and verification of the jobs that they do, it's by having a non-independent source there, you lose that transparency, or you could lose it, could be biased.
And I think that's where it would start, and then the FM guys might actually start employing those guys themselves, because they need to compete and be offering the right service to their customers.
Or it's built in as a baseline into every FM outsourced contract as a way that contract is going to be policed just from the get-go.
I'd like to add the point that your analytics have become greatly enhanced or of use to more people, used to community. Carbon would be obviously one of the new markets that has use for all of your analytics. The other one would be interactive grid, and I can go on and on. There's where you started out at sort of, HVAC roots, and that's the way we were all kind of envisioning this. But what you've actually created is a resource that is much bigger than you probably even ever imagined. Can you maybe speak to that, maybe Jim?
Sure, Ken, we've actually been very interested in carbon for the whole ride. And it's actually a sinusoid, like many things. People are very interested in it at some points and not very interested at all in other times. Internationally, we've always had more interest in carbon than we've had in the United States, but it's something we're very interested in. I think some of these value propositions, as I said, wax and wane, but once we get enough critical mass for people to understand that we can really prove that we're producing data to prove these metrics, I think we can get it to catch on. But we have to get out of the boiler room. We have to get up to a higher enterprise level where people care about these things. And, I think that's where the new, environmental sustainability action in boardrooms is going to be our friend. And if we can somehow tag the Division 25 specs that we're working to, or the specs we're working to, and tie that into ESG at a board level, I think we can really move the needle here.
That's what I see is that we're focused on the brick and mortar spec here, but we need to also be thinking about how we're going to float this off into the cloud. I know you don't like that word, but eventually there's a bunch of folks that are going to use your data and the rules that you are creating of how this data is formatted and the usefulness of it. And I think we have to start with a bigger picture and start thinking about how we can possibly structure and provide some help to some of the IoT folks that are wanting to use this data.
I think that through the C4SB group, Ken, we're trying to put together some real tactical plans rather than language like floating it to the cloud, where we're going to hopefully go out and reach out to the American Institute of Certified Public Accountants. People that have sustainability groups in other professional areas, which really dominate the business end of the thinking, and try to get the reporting to go up at a higher level. Because if we just stay at a facilities level, we're not going to get the cloud to take this forward.
Jim, to your point, or to whoever brought up ESG, I think that's the true unsung hero here with respect to analytics. And that is an opportunity to really take data and information and analytics that we have been doing and apply it to a whole new area that adds value, and Steve, to your point, to specific outcomes.
So we touched on this, I think, last week, the notion that this Division 2525 was created out of this sort of vacancy, as it were, of a really good specification in the CSI Division 25 spec. That's kind of where the name came from. But in a way, it's not just for the construction of the building or the construction of the system. It's for the operation, but also for these other things. Do we need to do anything different or talk about analytics in a different way to make sure that people are not just thinking about what with the analytics as being something that you install and forget?
On that, that's one of the struggles I had with aligning it with something like 25 or the 2500 series, right? Because it puts you into a camp by default. It puts you into
at least it starts you there.
It starts you there, right? And that's something I've struggled with as far as giving it the names 2525 and those things. Should it be something outside of that? I have a fear that we're going to end up being corralled into, well, you belong over here in this startup phase, as opposed to no, it can be applied at any time.
But just sort of asking that question from an analytics perspective of John and Jim, is that a good thing or a bad thing?
I don't know how to answer that. I think one of the things we find, and it goes back to this comment, analytics a lot more than FDD, right, is what is the customer's situation? What could I do with analytics for that customer? Okay, all I have is interval meter data from the main meter in 100 buildings. That's all I have. Great, you can do fantastic things with that, right? You're not going to be able to do other things that you would need other data for, but that doesn't mean that customer can't get started down a very effective path and that'll produce financial results, right? So this is part of the challenge in talking to people about analytics. Is it isn't one thing, and it is definitely influenced by what data you have available and how hard it is to get that data. The productized mindset is the problem. Jim brought that up earlier, right? We have software tools, analytics, but this is a service delivery business, right? It's a professional services business, and it has to be looked at that way. And I think so much of what goes on in buildings are viewed as capital expense. What's the price for X? I need 1,000 of them. That's it. End of story. They've been delivered. They're installed. I can forget about it. No, that's not what we're talking about here.
So I know we're running out of time, but the tact I've taken with cybersecurity, which is the area I've been focusing on, is in the execution section of the spec. Normally you have your general section, your product section, and your execution section in the CSI model. I've been modeling out in the execution section, what are the services, cybersecurity services that the customer can opt in for. And so there's 8 or 10 or 12 different service options. And I could see, since you guys are doing an analytics side, 95% of what you said is done through service providers, and you're doing it, Jim, as a service-oriented company. You can define what those services are. And then in the specification, what I've done in the cyber is that the owner decides up front, okay, here are the collection of possible ones. Here are the ones I want to do. And either I'm going to outsource them, or I'm going to insource them, or I'm going to share them. But I define each one of them, and I define what they do, and then they select from it. And that at the time of bidding, it gives everybody an option, the opportunity then to price it as a service, okay, as opposed to a product, because the product becomes a service. And so, and then you can define the contract terms. You can say it's 1 year, 2 years, however you want to do it from that perspective. But use the third part of the CSI to define services, and I think it can work. We'll see. I mean, I'm starting to roll it out now from the cyber perspective, but that's a suggestion you might want to consider for the analytics.
So as analytics almost as an enabler for
Mhm.
specific things.
For
that can then
specific
be-
services and
that-
define
that
it.
can be,
right?
that can be listed.
Yep.
Okay.
I think the other point is analytics beget analytics. As you start to analyze this stuff, you find you need more, and you'll be recommending back that you need more sensors, you need more. And yeah, I think it very quickly breaks away, and it also becomes bigger than the building, like trying to specify this into the original infrastructure of the building is so limiting, because we know it's going to be much bigger than that, and it's going to be much bigger than you can even imagine it.
So we're right at the top of the hour, past it. So I suggest we take this, and maybe this can form the foundation of next week's conversation. How do we turn it into a service? And we also need to cover the cybersecurity. So maybe we can do one or the other, or combine them both next week. But that's great. I think that's a great place to stop this particular show. Thank you, our analytics experts, John, Jim. Thanks.
Thank you.
For your 20 years of respective experience learning. And video of this will be up tomorrow. In the meantime, thank you everybody else for joining us, and have a great week, and we'll see you next week. So with that,
See you guys.
That's good.
bye-bye all.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, guys.
Bye-bye.
Bye.